written in the soil.
So Black Myth Wukong blew the doors off the industry, and now everyone is looking for the next massive mythological heavy hitter. Enter Genigod's Nezha, but if you're expecting another punishing Souls-like where you spend half of the time managing a stamina meter, think again. The team at Genigod's lab is explicitly aiming for a classic, aggressive God of War 3 rhythm, and honestly, that's exactly what the action genre needs right now. You play a unique incarnation of the rebel deity Nezha, starting out as a celestial spark that evolves into a form made of clay and sacred water. And that water isn't just a visual gimmick, it completely dictates how the game feels to play. They're basing the core mechanics on Bruce Lee's Be Water philosophy. You have 3 entirely distinct fighting styles, fists, swords, and spears, and you can morph between them, flexing your combos instantly, flowing straight from ground attacks into full mid-air aerial juggling. The scale here looks wild. You're actively exploring a world built out of the bodies of colossal, mountain-sized, ancient gods. It's like Shadow of the Colossus meets high-speed character action. You're scaling these giants using a unique container to collect sacred water for environmental puzzles and using a mechanic called Relic Fusion to change your abilities. You can literally combine your multi-armed celestial form with a sun god's bow to turn yourself into a fantasy Gatling archer. For a long time, if you wanted to experience the massive Swords of Legends universe, you were forced to log into a bloated MMO server and deal with the usual live service grind. Well, throw all of that out. Swords of Legends is returning to its roots as a full single-player action RPG built in Unreal Engine 5, and it's looking incredibly sharp. You step into the shoes of C-Pan, who is essentially an underworld enforcer. You're dead but reborn, and your day job is hunting down otherworldly horrors across a setting heavily pulled from classical Chinese literature. What makes the actual combat stand out here isn't just swinging a sharp piece of metal with flashy particles, it's the tactical utility of your spiritual toolkit. As an enforcer of the dead, you can lay down spiritual seals to hard freeze enemies in place, or better yet, summon the literal souls of the monsters you've previously beaten to fight alongside you as mid-combo assists. The gameplay footage hints at a really satisfying flow of parrying, reading enemy telegraphs, and matching the right weapon stance to the specific horror in front of you. Orogon Shanghai is treating this like a premium revival. By stripping away all the forced multiplayer fetch quests and focusing entirely on dense combat encounters, they're letting the core mechanics actually breathe.
The city is like liquid silver, always changing.
Anime action RPGs have a bad habit of looking a bit identical these days. Usually it's a bunch of colorful teenagers running around a generic green fantasy field, but Silver Palace is trying something entirely different. It takes those flashy high-speed combat mechanics and drops them right into a moody industrialized Victorian metropolis called Silvernia. You're playing a detective trying to solve high-stakes crimes in a city that's basically hooked on a revolutionary, volatile resource called Silverium. Structurally, the game splits its time between actual detective work, hunting for clues in the rain-slicked shadows of back alleys, and some surprisingly violent high-fidelity action. The developers Silver Studio are leveraging Unreal Engine 5 to deliver these incredibly smooth tag team QTE combos. You're building up a squad of distinct characters and hot swapping between them mid-fight to chain together massive screen-clearing kinetic attacks. The contrast here is what makes it click. One minute you're having tense, cinematic conversations with shady underworld figures, and the next you're pulling off a perfectly timed dodge and unleashing a barrage of stylish steel and magic strikes. It feels a bit like Genshin Impact met a gritty detective noir and decided to have a baby with a character action game. If you're enjoying the video so far and want to see more just like this, do us a massive favor and hit that subscribe button. We are pushing hard right now to hit that 1,000 subscriber milestone, and every single one of you clicking that button honestly makes a huge difference. It takes a massive amount of guts for a studio to look at their critically acclaimed, highly successful 2D Metroidvania and say, yeah, let's throw that camera perspective in the trash for the next one. But that's exactly what T-Games is doing with Zoopunk. If you played Forged and Shadow Torch, you know they absolutely mastered that gritty, side-scrolling diesel punk world. This time around, they're pulling the camera back into a full 3D team-based action brawler, and the mechanical shift looks wild. Looking closely at the character design for Reitan, you can see how the team is retaining that weathered, hyper-detailed animal punk aesthetic while re-engineering the character models to hold up under the scrutiny of a fully rotational 3D environment. Set decades before the first game during the first Torch War, Zoopunk acts as a prequel exploring how Torch City became an industrial battleground in the first place. Reitan the Rabbit is back as a younger veteran swordsman, but he isn't fighting solo anymore. The core mechanic revolves around a multi-hero roster where you're leveraging completely different animal traits mid-combat. You can fluidly swap from Reitan's agile sword strikes to Broughton the Rhino, a massive powerhouse brawler who swings a literal giant flame sword, or switch over to Trixie the Chipmunk for rapid-fire, acrobatic hit-and-run tactics. Think about the last time you saw a game try to mix tight third-person gunplay with full-on high-speed character action melee. Usually one half of that equation ends up feeling like a complete afterthought. Either the guns feel like pea shooters, or the swordplay feels floaty. Enigmatrix is trying to balance both of those elements on a knife edge with Exiledge, and the early gameplay looks incredibly snappy. As part of the PlayStation China Hero project, this one drops you into a sci-fi universe that looks like a surreal mix of ancient architecture and reality-bending geometry. You play a young guy named Alter, running through an eternal cycle to figure out why the world is fracturing. But the real draw here is how the combat actively forces you to switch mindsets mid-fight. You aren't just shooting from behind a wall, and you aren't just spamming a light attack button. You're meant to use your firearms to soften up targets from a distance, strip away enemy shields, and then instantly close the gap to trigger flashy, devastating hack-and-slash combos. The boss fights they've shown off look massive, requiring you to constantly dash through bullet hell patterns before finding a window to launch yourself into the air for an aerial juggle. It feels like a very deliberate nod to games like Devil May Cry, but with a much heavier reliance on tactical positioning and gunplay. Put it out! If you only know developer Pythia Games from the bright, cozy life sim vibes of My Time at Portia or My Time at Sandrock, then the Godslayer is going to give you absolute whiplash. They are pivoting hard from farming and building to a massive, dark, 40-hour open-world action RPG where your primary goal is to violently dethrone tyrannical deities. The setting alone is worth paying attention to. It's an Eastern-inspired steampunk metropolis called the Zhou capital. Think airships floating past neon-lit canals, towering factories, and an upper class living in air-conditioned luxury while everyone else chokes on coal soot. You play as Cheng, and elements are out for revenge after the god slaughtered his family. What makes the actual moment-to-moment gameplay look distinct is how it handles its magic system. You command 5 distinct elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, and they interact dynamically with the environment and your enemies. If you hit a wooden structure or enemy with fire, it burns. Throw water on that fire, and a thick cloud of steam rises up that you can actually use as cover to blind your targets. It's got a ton of freeform immersive sim DNA mixed into a high-fidelity Unreal Engine 5 action game. You can choose to go in loud with Elemental Fury, or use vertical parkour to sneak across rooftops, bribe guards, and find hidden routes into enemy strongholds. It's an incredibly ambitious leap for this studio, and the elemental chemistry looks like a blast to experiment with.
站住！今天这儿被王府包了。
Historical martial arts games are having a massive moment right now, but A Whisper of Fall Jinyiwei is ditching the standard fantasy tropes to give us a gritty tactical espionage thriller set in the dying days of the Ming Dynasty. You play as a member of the Jinyiwei, who are essentially the Emperor's elite secret police and personal guard. This project started as a tiny 6-person indie game under the name Project Jinyiwei. But after catching the eye of PlayStation's talent scouts, the team at Kengmo Game Entertainment scaled up to a full AA production team, and you can see that budget upgrade on the screen. The game relies heavily on heavy stealth, vertical parkour, and a brutal rhythm-based combat system where timing your blocks and deflections is the difference between life and death. It feels less like a traditional power fantasy and more like a tense high-stakes dance where every sword strike carries real weight. But the real wild card here is your protagonist's deduction ability. The developers are pitching this as a mechanic that lets you look through shifting timelines and sandbox levels to unravel political conspiracies before they happen. You're investigating crime scenes, gathering intelligence on rival factions, and using that data to completely alter how you approach a mission. One minute you're slinking through rain-slicked alleys tracking a target from the rooftops, and the next you're locked in a high-intensity duel with a rival master where one wrong button press means a game over screen. If you feel like every single World War II shooter over the last 20 years has basically just asked you to storm the beaches of Normandy or defend the streets of Stalingrad for the 100th time, you are definitely not alone. The industry has recycled the exact same European theater maps to the point of complete exhaustion. But 14 Years of Flames is finally stepping out of that comfort zone, forcing players into the brutal, chaotic reality of the Second Sino-Japanese War from 1931 to 1945. Developed by Fenghuo Studio, this is a dedicated, linear, story-driven, single-player first-person shooter. In a market totally dominated by open-world grinding and multiplayer live services, a hyper-focused historical campaign like this feels like a massive throwback to the classic era of Call of Duty or Medal of Honor. Structurally, you aren't just stuck behind the eyes of a single super soldier. The game tackles its massive 14-year timeline by dividing the experience across 7 different POV characters, throwing you into 16 distinct real-world historical battles that span from the rugged wilderness of northeast China all the way to the fallback defense of Nanjing. The developers are leveraging Unreal Engine 5 to target a strict 1-to-1 fidelity with period-accurate weapons, military vehicles, and authentic infantry equipment. The gunplay looks heavy and unyielding, emphasizing large-scale trenches, massive artillery bombardments, and chaotic frontline pushes where managing your iron sights and positioning is everything. Imagine an alternative history where 1980s Japan completely bought out the United States, turned the Statue of Liberty into a giant anime statue, and then the entire world immediately ended. That's the exact brand of absolute lunacy Showa American story is serving up. Netcom Games is fully leaning into B-movie exploitation cinema with this one, and honestly, the industry needs a bit more of this unhinged energy. You play as Choco, a teenage girl who wakes up resurrected inside a body bag in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. America has been transformed into a desert graveyard covered in neon signs, massive sushi bars, and hordes of zombies wearing traditional Japanese attire mixed with Hollywood tropes. Mechanically, this isn't trying to be a deep, overcomplicated RPG. It's a loud, third-person hack-and-slash action game where your main tools of destruction are things like a massive drill, an SMG, or a classic katana. You cruise around a ruined North America on a customized chopper, building out a rolling base of operations where you can play ridiculous mini-games like spinning old records or practicing in batting cages just to level up your stats. It's got a very specific hyper-stylized PS2-era campiness to it, but backed by a surprisingly high budget. If you miss the days when games weren't afraid to look ridiculous, this one should be high on your radar. The parry-heavy action scene has been incredibly crowded over the last few years, but Project the Perceiver is trying to steal the spotlight by introducing a mechanic that changes how you view character classes. Developed by 17J Studio, this open-world wuxia action game drops you into a beautiful, fractured, dark fantasy version of ancient China. The real draw here is the mask system. Instead of locking yourself into a single combat style at a character creation screen, you collect physical masks from defeated bosses or legendary figures and hot swap them instantly mid-fight. One mask turns you into a dual-wielding, fast-striking acrobat who relies on rapid evasion. Another instantly shifts you into a heavy-hitting vanguard who can deflect massive incoming attacks with a giant claymore. The swordplay looks incredibly precise, emphasizing rhythmic deflects, posture breaking, and using structural environmental elements like running up crumbling walls or grappling across rooftops to gain high ground. It avoids the typical loose, floaty combat feel that ruins a lot of open-world martial arts titles. Instead, every sword clash carries real weight, and the grim, theatrical aesthetic makes every major boss encounter look like a choreographed stage play. When Game Science rolled up to Gamescom and dropped the reveal for Black Myth Zhong, the entire industry collectively leaned forward. Black Myth Wukong absolutely shattered records, and instead of just recycling that framework for a simple expansion pack, the studio is moving straight into a dark horror-tinged standalone follow-up. This time around, you aren't playing as a Monkey King searching for relics. You're stepping into the boots of Zhong, the legendary gruff demon hunter from Chinese folklore who essentially acts as a supernatural bounty hunter between the mortal realm and hell. The footage gives off a much grittier, more oppressive vibe than its predecessor. We're talking ancient, shadow-drenched ghost towns, terrifying underworld spirits, and a protagonist who commands absolute authority over the dead, even riding into battle on the back of a massive tiger. While the developers were honest that the project is still early in production, the mechanical direction they've laid down is clear. They're taking that precise, dodge-heavy, high-intensity action combat from the first game and pushing it into a full supernatural exorcism. You're tracking down specific rogue entities, studying their weaknesses, and using specialized talismans and spiritual magic to tear them apart. It looks incredibly ambitious and proves the game science isn't interested in playing it safe.
It's shut down?
We just got here. How's it already closed?
When NetEase first revealed Project Mugen, everyone immediately labeled it Anime GTA and assumed it would be another standard free-to-play gacha grind. But the game has since been officially retitled Ananta, and the developers at Naked Rain dropped a massive bombshell that changes how we look at it. They are entirely ditching the character gacha system. You unlock the roster purely through story progression, while monetization focuses entirely on cosmetics, cars, and housing. That is a massive win for players who just want a high-quality urban playground. The game puts you in Nova Inception Urbs, a massive neon-lit, Japanese-styled concrete jungle acting as a supernatural investigator hunting down anomalies. But what really sets Ananta apart from its competitors is the sheer velocity of its traversal. There is absolutely no stamina meter governing your movement. You can run up walls, hop onto customizable cars, or use grappling hooks to swing between skyscrapers with a momentum that feels heavily inspired by Marvel's Spider-Man or Prototype. Some characters even have ridiculous built-in transport, like a massive mallet that instantly transforms into a motorcycle. Combat keeps that same high-speed energy. You build a team of 4 characters, hot-swapping between them to string together kinetic martial arts combos and telekinetic environment throws. You can pick up cars, throw park benches, and cause absolute chaos during boss fights. By focusing heavily on physical player freedom and dropping the predatory character pool mechanics, Ananta is aiming to be a genuinely refreshing open-world action title. We've seen a massive wave of historical action games lately, but Blood Message, originally known as Guitang, is steering clear of the usual fantasy elements to give us a brutal, grounded, historical thriller. Developed by 24 Entertainment, the team behind the hit battle royale Naraka Blade Point, this is a strictly single-player linear action-adventure game built from the ground up in Unreal Engine 5. The game is set in 848 AD during the late Tang Dynasty and is based entirely on a harrowing piece of real history. Following a massive uprising against the brutal Tubo Empire in the border region of Shazhou, a rebel leader dispatched 10 groups of ordinary commoners to cross thousands of miles of hostile enemy-controlled territory to deliver a message to the capital. Chang'an requesting imperial reinforcements, historically only one group survived. You play as Pei Changguan, one of those desperate messengers fighting to escape encirclement, protect your young son Ning, and get that message across the desert. Because it lacks magical power-ups or mythical dragons, the gameplay relies entirely on raw survival, stealth, and a visceral, physics-heavy combat system. You have to carefully manage light and heavy attacks, blocks, and rhythmic parries that lead into incredibly violent execution animation. The developers actually partnered with regional cultural departments to digitally scan real historical sites and terrain across the Hexi corridor. The result is an incredibly atmospheric, high-stakes journey that feels heavy, desperate, and deeply human. Usually when a game developer says they're putting a fresh spin on Arthurian legend, Your mind instantly goes to a generic green field, some stone ruins, and a guy in shiny armor shouting about a sword. Tides of Annihilation takes that entire trope, throws it into a wood chipper, and drops the remnants right into a shattered post-apocalyptic London. The developers at Eclipse Glow Games are doing something wild here, reimagining the entire city as a giant mechanical tree where the iconic districts are twisted into towering vertical branches. You control Gwendolyn, humanity's lone survivor who happens to be voiced by Jennifer English, the same actress who played Shadowheart in Baldur's Gate 3. Her whole deal is that she can summon the spectral forms of the Knights of the Round Table mid-combat. You build out a squad of 4 knights and hot swap them instantly to chain massive metal-shredding combos. But the real kicker that caught everyone's eye in the recent gameplay showcases is a mechanic called the Mirror Space Folded Realm. During major encounters, the screen literally splits and you have to control Gwendolyn and a summoned knight at the exact same time, fighting off enemies in 2 parallel dimensions simultaneously. Add in massive mountain-sized colossal knights that roam the map, acting as moving vertical platforming levels and boss fights, and you have a game that looks incredibly high concept. It is incredibly rare to see a modern studio show this level of sheer, unadulterated confidence. The team at S-Game basically looked at the chaotic late 2026 release window, saw the terrifying shadow of GTA 6 looming over the entire industry, and publicly said they couldn't care less about the competition. They pushed Phantom Blade Zero to October 29, 2026, explicitly stating that they aren't running away from anyone, they just refuse to ship a game that isn't completely baked. On top of that, they've proudly stated that every single piece of art in the game is handcrafted, entirely rejecting AI visual generation to keep their artists' original intent intact. That old school premium mindset is exactly why this Kung Fu Punk action RPG feels so different. You play as Soul, a framed assassin with only a short time left to live, hacking your way through a rain-slicked world filled with occult technology and rogue martial arts masters. The actual combat is lightning fast, focusing heavily on authentic, high-speed Hong Kong cinema choreography, rather than the slow, agonizingly deliberate pacing of a standard Souls-like. It's an absolute masterclass in rhythmic parrying, aggressive counterattacks, and reading high-low enemy telegraphs. Running on Unreal Engine 5, the frame rate looks remarkably smooth, which is mandatory when a single missed split-second deflect means a quick trip back to the checkpoint. If you enjoyed this video, do us a huge favor and hit that like button. It seriously helps the channel out more than you know. And if you're new here, consider hitting subscribe and clicking that little bell icon so you never miss any video.